Donald Trump has told Turkey's president to stop buying Russian oil. In talks with Recep Tayyip Erdoğan at the White House, Trump held out the possibility that, in return, Washington may be willing to lift its ban on Turkey buying US F-35 fighter jets. Ankara was expelled from the fighter program when it bought air defense systems from Russia. Turkey has been one of the biggest buyers of Russian energy despite international boycotts over the war in Ukraine. President Trump was also asked about Turkey's role as a potential mediator to end the war in Ukraine.
Everybody respects Erdogan. They really respect Erdogan. I do. And I think he could have a big influence if he wants to. Right now he's very neutral. He likes being neutral. So do I like being neutral. But he's somebody that if he got involved, the best thing he could do is not buy oil and gas from Russia. If he did that, that would be probably the best thing. He knows Putin like I know Putin.
I'd like to welcome Sinan Ciddi now, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies. He's the Director of the Turkey Programme. Welcome to you. Trump says he wants Turkey to stop buying Russian oil and gas. How do you think Ankara is going to respond to that, given that it does rely heavily on Russian energy?
Yeah, it's a tricky one for Turkey simply because Ankara may be facing the prospect of US sanctions if Trump makes bold moves to further punish countries that continue to import fossil fuels from Russia. So one of the deals that we've seen tentatively signed with the United States right now is to purchase liquefied natural gas from the United States for a number of years up until 2045, if I've seen this correctly, which is about accounting for 8 to 10% of Turkey's yearly needs. But this will come at quite a steep cost. But then the question becomes, where will Turkey essentially continue to procure the remainder of its needs, if not from Russia? Because Turkey does require a considerable amount of natural gas, and Russia is the cheapest and most reliable supplier it has had until now. So just because Mr. Trump has asked Erdogan to give it up, how will Turkey procure the rest? And more importantly, in return for doing so, what will Turkey get?
Yeah, interesting. Now, the US and Turkey are in a long-running dispute over fighter jets. Now, the US expelled Turkey from its F-35 program in 2019 after Turkey bought air defense systems from Russia. Trump seems to be signalling a shift on that, though. How risky could this be for NATO?
I think it could be considerably risky. Turkey was expelled from the F-35 program, as you say, because Turkey acquired Russian defensive missiles from the Russian Federation back in 2019, which puts the stealth capabilities of the F-35 at considerable risk because it can collect sensitive data from that aircraft and pass it on to Russian adversaries, because those S-400 missiles that it purchased from Russia are operated in part by Russian crews. And NATO, as well as the United States, was livid with Turkey after repeated warnings not to purchase those air defense systems, saying that Turkey should be purchasing NATO-manufactured systems, which it did not. Now, Turkey has not made any attempt whatsoever to divest of those S-400s, and it wants to purchase the F-35s. And I'm not sure how that things are basically compatible, because there are existing US laws and sanctions in place which prevent Turkey acquiring the F-35, even though Mr. Trump did signal that Turkey could acquire, or he may be interested in talking to Turkey about acquiring this. I think from where I'm sitting, and from the amount of pressure being positioned and placed upon the United States administration, Turkey would have to make significant moves on S-400s before the administration is willing to move on selling F-35 to Turkey. I think something would have to give, and I don't see Turkey signaling on that, but it's early hours since the two have met, and we'll just have to see.
Yeah, I'd like to finally ask you about the optics of this visit, because Joe Biden never invited Erdogan to the White House. Trump now seems to be embracing him. How important has this visit been to Erdogan, both on the international stage but at home as well?
Yeah, correct. I mean, look, Biden did not want Biden did not want Erdogan in the White House for good reasons. I mean, from his time in office, as vice president and as president, Erdogan is toxic. He does not like him For Erdogan, this is a big win. Erdogan has wanted to get back in the White House and, having a photo opportunity with the sitting US president since he first met with Trump. So this is a huge win. The optics are huge simply because he gets to show that at home, that he's met with the US president, he has gravitas on the world stage, that he's negotiating, he's getting deals signed with the US president. And at a time when, the Turkish president is jailing leaders, close to banning the opposition party at home or replacing it with caretaker leadership, cancelling out the last vestiges of democratic governance inside of Turkey, being legitimized by the leader of the so-called free world, the United States, right? This gives Erdogan a considerable amount of gravitas and currency on the world stage. So it's more of a win, even if he doesn't get F-35s or anything else on that matter. And so he's walked away probably a little bit chuffed at this point.
That was Sinan Ciddi at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Thank you so much for your analysis today.
Dorian Jones followed this meeting from Istanbul. Dorian, what came out of this face-to-face between Erdogan and Trump?
Well, the only real concrete agreement was this strategic nuclear civil cooperation agreement. Now, that has taken everyone by surprise. No one saw that coming. Now, Turkey is engaged in a major nuclear energy program, and controversially, it is Russia that is building Turkey's first major nuclear reactor, a multi-billion-dollar project, one of Russia's biggest overseas civil projects is engaged in. Now, Turkey wants to build at least one more, possibly two. And there has been speculation that Turkey would again turn to Russia. But now with this agreement, it possibly paves the way that Turkey will be looking to the United States. And that will be particularly welcomed by Trump. Trump, in his meeting with Erdogan in the Oval Office, publicly chided Turkey over its energy links to Russia, being one of the biggest buyers of fossil energies in the world. And this nuclear energy deal will, I think, help to assuage those criticisms. Other key issues that Turkey were hoping for: a major breakthrough in the lifting of an embargo on the sale of America's most sophisticated F-35 fighter jet. No breakthrough there, although the US ambassador, Tom Barrack, said that a possible resolution to this problem could be found by the end of the year. The key problem there is that Congress has to sign off on it. That is going to be a difficult sell for Trump, but the US ambassador did seem to be very positive that a positive outcome could be had. Also, another controversial issue is over Syria. The Americans are supporting the Syrian Kurdish force, which Turkey considers linked to Kurdish separatists inside Turkey. Now, Ankara has been lobbying very hard for the US to use its influence for those Syrian Kurds to merge with the Damascus forces. Again, the US Ambassador Barrack said they do expect progress on that issue. But the key takeaway from this is just the mood music. There was a very positive indication on both sides that the meeting went exceptionally well. The two leaders got on very well. And in fact, US Ambassador Barrack described the meeting as, quote, simply epic.
Simply epic. And it's quite remarkable that it was Erdogan's first visit to the White House since 2019. That was during Donald Trump's first time in office. From Ankara's perspective, are ties with the U.S. better now under President Trump?
Well, it's night and day. You were right. Trump's predecessor, Biden, refused to invite Erdogan to Washington. That broke a tradition that goes back to the Second World War, that the US president would either invite his Turkish counterpart once or to Washington or would visit Turkey. Biden didn't do that. There was a deep chill between the two leaders. Now with Trump, they're already talking about a major reset, the two leaders cooperating across the region. The key area of tension, though, still is Israel and its war in Gaza. No progress there, even though Erdogan had been pressing Trump. But there is a feeling that Trump is working behind the scenes to find a resolution to this conflict. There's talk of a 21-point plan that Trump is proposing to end it. Key issue now is Trump's meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, on Monday. Erdogan, and along with the rest of the world, will be watching that meeting very closely.
That's Dorian Jones in Istanbul. Thanks so much, Dorian. And I want to keep talking about that meeting with Gönül. She's the director of the Middle East Institute's Turkish program. The Turkish president isn't accustomed to fielding questions from journalists. How do you feel like he did today?
Well, that's right. And it was the Turkish side who was asking the American side not to have a press conference. But after what we've seen today, the questions that were asked by the journalists were quite softball questions. So I'm sure that must have pleased President Erdogan. But I think there are still remarks that were made by President Trump that the Turkish side had wished he hadn't. Because President Trump said that Pastor Brunson, who was kept in Turkey and was sentenced to jail, 35 years in jail, Trump said that, you know, he was sentenced to jail, but then I called Erdogan and he released him. So that was the number one remark that the Turkish side didn't like. And then Trump also talked about how Erdogan is the guy who knows about the rigged elections more than anyone. So
we
that
actually
was
have
also
that
an
soundbite.
unpleasant.
Sorry to interrupt you. We actually have that soundbite. Let me play that for our audience.
We've been friends for a long time, actually, even for 4 years when I was in exile, unfairly, as it turns out. Rigged election, you know, he knows about rigged elections better than anybody.
Okay, you say Erdogan's delegation did not like the sound of that. What do you think he meant there?
Well, it's hard to say when it comes to President Trump, but certainly the Turkish opposition is framing it as a very controversial remark. Obviously, I mean, the Turkish opposition has many problems. Erdogan, this visit comes at a time when Erdogan is taking unprecedented steps to undermine the remaining pillars of Turkish democracy. So this fits neatly in Turkish pro-democracy forces narrative. And just yesterday, President Trump's envoy, Tom Barak, made a very controversial statement. He said that, you know, Turkey is a democracy, but also authoritarian. And we have many problems in bilateral ties, but President Trump made a bold move. And he said that he will give Erdogan what he needs the most, and that is legitimacy. So combine those two remarks and the remarks that Trump had made today, I think it gives a lot of ammunition to the Turkish opposition's hands.
Mm-hmm. Donald Trump wants Turkey to stop buying Russian oil and gas. How do you expect Ankara to respond?
That's a very difficult thing. And I know the Turkish officials have been very concerned about that because Turkey is globally, after China and India, is the largest buyer of Russian energy. Under President Biden, some waivers had been granted to Turkey. I think they expired. There was a renewal last May. I don't know if they're still in place, but that is certainly a huge problem for Turkey because Turkey is energy dependent and Russian energy is cheap. So Turkey has almost tripled its energy imports from Russia since the invasion of Ukraine. So that's a very big problem. And I think that's one of the reasons why right before he came to Washington, President Erdogan, announced that Turkey will be buying more American LNG. So that was kind of served as a sweetener before he came, because this is going to be, the Russia angle is going to be a huge problem in bilateral ties.
Yeah. Donald Trump likes a good deal. We know that. He suggested lifting sanctions against Turkey. What would you think the U.S. wants in return?
Well, they could push Turkey to stop this energy partnership with Russia. Again, that's not going to be easy. But I think from Ankara's point of view, right now, the most important thing is to be able to buy engines and spare parts from the United States, because Erdogan and his son-in-law have been investing in Turkey's indigenous defense sector. That sector is very important to Erdogan's stability at home. So that's why that component is a lot more important than purchasing the F-35s. Now, can Trump deliver on that? Again, selling the F-35s is difficult because it involves the Congress and there's a lot of anti-Erdogan sentiment in the Congress. But selling those spare parts could be done, and the Turkish side has been asking Trump to use his executive authority to lift the sanctions, CAATSA sanctions, unilaterally bypassing the Congress. And before the meeting, President Trump indicated that he could do so.
Gönül of the Middle East Institute, many thanks. Great speaking to you today.
Thanks for having me.